Hey there, city dwellers. Ever wondered if your city's as dangerous as everyone says? Or maybe you're convinced it's a serene oasis in a world gone mad. It's hilarious how wrong public perception can be. More often than you'd believe, the reality of a situation is literally the exact opposite of what people think. And there's no better example of this than how people perceive the safety of major US cities. In 2023, Gallup asked Americans from all over the country whether they thought certain cities were safe. The results were, let's just say, amusingly inaccurate. I dug into the data, and guess what? The truth is going to surprise you. First of all, I have been using AI voices for narration in my previous videos because I want to keep this channel anonymous, and I believe that my actual voice is extremely unpleasant. However, I have been using different AI voices for different videos because I cannot decide which to stick with. Therefore, to help me decide, I will use a variety of different AI voices throughout this video, and I would deeply appreciate it if you could let me know which one you like best in the comments below. Anyway, back to city safety.
To gauge the safety of each city, I determined that violent crimes per 100,000 people would be the best stat to use, since it is the most relevant to a person's safety. However, I wanted to ensure consistency by using statistics from the same year for each city. Unfortunately, while official statistics for violent crimes in 2023 are available for some of these cities, they are not available for all of them. In fact, the most recent year in which I could find official violent crime statistics for all these cities is 2019. Comparing the cities for which violent crime data is available for both 2019 and 2023, the differences are small, so I believe it's reasonable to assume that the differences between the other cities' 2019 and 2023 data are also small. However, I could find official murder statistics for every city on the list for 2023. And murder rates are arguably the most objective and precise measure of safety there is. Nevertheless, there are more threats to a person's safety than just murders, and the 2019 violent crime statistics already include 2019 murders. Therefore, in this video, the cities will be ranked from the safest, compared to public perception, to the most dangerous, compared to public perception using 2019 violent crimes per 100,000 people to measure actual safety. Additionally, for each city, I will also mention the discrepancy between perceived and actual safety and where they would rank on this list using 2023 murders per 100,000 people to determine actual safety instead. Here's how I did it. I normalized and log transformed both the percent unsafe figures and violent crime figures for each city. Then I calculated the difference between these figures to determine how much the public overestimates or underestimates safety. I'm calling this the Perception Gap Index. Higher positive numbers on the Perception Gap Index indicate that a city is significantly safer compared to other cities on the list than the public perceives, while more negative numbers suggest it is considerably more dangerous. Values close to zero imply that public perception accurately reflects the city's safety relative to the others on the list.
You can find both the Python code used to calculate each city's PGI, as well as the spreadsheet with all the figures used in the calculations in the description below.
The city that is safer than Americans think by the biggest margin, and has the grand prize for the most colossal chasm between perception and reality, is none other than New York City. Yes, that's right, the Big Apple, home of Broadway, pizza slices bigger than your face, and apparently unwarranted fear. A staggering 57% of Americans believe that NYC is unsafe, ranking it fourth highest in perceived danger among our list of 15 cities. But wait, there's more. Breaking it down by political alignment, 64% of Democrats think NYC is safe, which might seem high but is actually the 11th lowest among cities for this group. But Republicans? Oh boy, just 22% of them believe NYC is safe, 12th lowest among all cities. Now, let's bring in some reality to crash this party of fear. In truth, NYC is by far the safest city on our list, both in terms of violent crimes and murders. In 2019, New York had only 538.9 violent crimes per 100,000 people, and in 2023, the murder rate was a mere 4.67 per 100,000 people. New York City is the only city on this list with a murder rate even lower than the national average of 5.30. New York's murder rate is approximately equal to that of the state of Kansas, and lower than those of 29 other states. Overall, the percentage of Americans who believe that NYC is unsafe is one of the highest, even though it is by far the safest major city in the country. This results in a gargantuan plus 66. 67 Perception Gap Index, using both violent crime and murder rates. making it by far the safest city relative to public perception, not to mention it already being the safest city in absolute terms as well. And here's a fun fact for you. When measuring safety as deaths from external causes, New York City is one of the safest places in the entire country, with the lowest murder rates of any major US city and none of the predominant factors driving deaths from external causes in suburban and rural areas, like rampant car culture or opioid crises. NYC boasts some of the lowest death rates from external causes in America. Out of all 997 counties reported by the CDC for 2020, Staten Island ranked 5th lowest. Queens came in at 7th. And Manhattan placed 11th in deaths from external causes. NYC is safer than almost every single county in the entire United States, whether rural, suburban or urban. Next up on our list is the City of Angels, Los Angeles. Turns out 58% of Americans think Los Angeles is about as safe as juggling chainsaws blindfolded, ranking it 3rd in perceived danger among our 15 cities. Digging deeper, we find that 64% of Democrats and just 21% of Republicans believe Los Angeles is safe. Apparently, Hollywood's got everyone thinking Los Angeles is more of a crime thriller than a rom-com. But here's where things get interesting. In reality, Los Angeles isn't quite the crime scene people imagine. With 761.31 violent crimes per 100,000 people, Los Angeles has the 6th lowest violent crime rate on our list. And when it comes to murders, it's even better, ranking 5th lowest with 8.56 murders per 100,000 people. This glaring discrepancy gives Los Angeles a perception gap index, PGI, of plus 42, 97 when using violent crime rates, and an even higher plus 45, 61 when considering murder rates. In both cases, Los Angeles ranks 2nd out of the 15 cities in terms of how much safer it is than people think. So, next time you're stuck in traffic on the 405, remember, you're statistically safer than you feel. Next up is Chicago, where the crime rate is moderately high, but not quite the crime apocalypse most people think. A staggering 70% of Americans believe that Chicago is unsafe, ranking it 2nd highest among our 15 cities. Among Democrats, just 41% think Chicago is safe, placing it as the 2nd lowest. But the real shocker, just 11% of Republicans believe Chicago is safe, the lowest among this group, and even lower than Detroit. Now, let's ground this in reality. Chicago's actual violent crime rate is 1,098.86 per 100,000 people, which is indeed the 4th highest on our list. And its murder rate stands at 23.16 per 100,000 people, the 6th highest. While these stats are slightly higher than the 15 city averages, they're not nearly as bad as the perception. Given this mismatch between perception and reality, Chicago scores a perception gap index, PGI, of plus 40, 57 using violent crime rates, the 3rd highest among the cities. When we switch to murder rates, Chicago's PGI is plus 29, 45, the 4th highest. So, while Chicago might have its rough edges, it's not quite the danger zone many believe it to be. Next time someone brings up Chi-Town's crime, you can tell them they're exaggerating, by quite a bit.
Next on our list is the city by the bay, San Francisco. Apparently 46% of Americans think SF is about as safe as hugging a cactus, making it the 6th highest in perceived danger. When we break it down by party lines, 74% of Democrats and just 32% of Republicans believe it's safe. Maybe they watched too many movies set in a gritty version of SF. But here's the plot twist. In reality, San Francisco's violent crime rate is the 4th lowest among our 15 cities, with 715 violent crimes per 100,000 people. And when it comes to murders, it's even better. SF has the 3rd lowest murder rate at 6.68 per 100,000 people, almost as low as the national average. This stark contrast gives San Francisco a perception gap index, PGI, of plus 22. 65 using violent crime rates, the 4th highest. And when we switch to murder rates, the PGI jumps to plus 30. 34, the 3rd highest. So despite what half the country might think, SF is far from being the urban jungle it's often made out to be. Time to trade those fear goggles for a nice pair of rose-colored glasses. Next up is Philadelphia, where half of Americans think it's a no-go zone, making it the 5th highest in perceived danger. And breaking it down by political lines, just 65% of Democrats and 30% of Republicans believe they'd be safe in the city of brotherly love. Maybe they've just had one too many cheesesteaks? But let's talk reality. Philadelphia has a violent crime rate of 947.58 per 100,000 people, the 7th highest on our list, almost smack dab in the middle of the 15-city average. When it comes to murders, Philly clocks in with 25.09 per 100,000 people, the 5th highest, which is moderately higher than the 15-city average. So what does this all mean? Philly's Perception Gap Index, PGI, is +9. 96 when we look at violent crime rates, placing it at #5 and showing that Americans moderately underestimate the city's safety. However, flip the script to murder rates, and Philly's PGI drops to -15.63, ranking it #8. This means that when it comes to murders, folks are giving Philly a bit more credit than it might deserve. Next up is Miami, the city of sunshine, beaches, and apparently a relatively low dose of dread. 40% of Americans believe Miami is unsafe, putting it in the 10th spot on the fear list. Plus, 61% of Democrats and 58% of Republicans agree that Miami is safe. But hold on to your flip-flops, let's look at the reality. Miami's violent crime rate is 720.94 per 100,000 people, making it the 5th lowest on our list of cities. When it comes to murders, Miami clocks in at 17.55 per 100,000 people, which is smack dab in the middle, both the 8th highest and the 8th lowest, aka the median murder rate. This discrepancy gives Miami a perception gap index of +9, 53 using violent crime rates, ranking it 6th on the list and showing that people moderately underestimate Miami's safety. However, switch the metric to murder rates, and Miami's PGI plummets to -21.32, ranking #10. This indicates that when it comes to getting murdered, Miami might be a bit more dangerous than you think. So, overall, Americans generally believe Miami to be one of the safer cities on the list, and they'd be right if they're measuring safety by violent crime rates. But if you're measuring by murder rates, you might want to keep an eye out while you're enjoying that mojito on the beach. Then we have Seattle, where it rains more than it rains terror. Only 35% of Americans believe Seattle is unsafe, making it the 13th highest, or should I say 3rd lowest, on our list of panic-inducing places. A whopping 85% of Democrats think Seattle is safe, the highest among the Blue Crew, and 42% of Republicans also believe Seattle is safe. In reality, Seattle's violent crime rate is 632.69 per 100,000 people, the 2nd lowest on our list, and its murder rate is 8.34 per 100,000 people, the 4th lowest. This discrepancy hands Seattle a perception gap index of +8, 86 using violent crimes, the 7th highest, showing that Americans moderately underestimate how chill Seattle really is. However, with a PGI of -1.30 using murders, it suggests that Americans might slightly overestimate Seattle's safety when it comes to not getting murdered. Overall, people generally view Seattle as one of the safest cities on the list, and guess what? They're pretty spot on. Seattle is one of the safest, moderately more so if you're looking at violent crimes, and just a smidge less so when considering murder rates. So, rest easy and enjoy your artisanal coffee. It's probably safer than you think. Next up, Washington, D.C. Yes, our nation's capital, where 46% of Americans believe it's unsafe, putting it 6th on our list of cities to clutch your pearls in. 72% of Democrats and 32% of Republicans believe it's safe. Now, let's inject some reality into this paranoia party. D.C.'s violent crime rate stands at 948.74 per 100,000 people, which is high but not panic attack inducing, ranking 6th and roughly on par with the 15-city average. But here's the kicker. D.C.'s murder rate is a whopping 8.36 per 100,000 people, the 2nd highest on our list. Plus, over the past couple of years, while murder rates in all the other cities have either been stagnating or dropping faster than my Wi-Fi during an important Zoom call, D.C. stands out as the only place where the murder rates have been climbing. So what does this mean for the Perception Gap Index? Using violent crimes, D.C. has a modest PGI of +1. 54, ranking number 8, and suggesting Americans slightly underestimate its safety. But switch to murder rates and the PGI nosedives to -44.41, plummeting DC to number 13, and indicating that Americans might be overestimating their chances of surviving a night in the capital without becoming a statistic. Next on our list is Atlanta. 45% of Americans believe it is unsafe, putting it right in the middle of our list. Moreover, 77% of Democrats and 38% of Republicans think Atlanta is safe. In reality, Atlanta's rate of violent crimes is 935.72 per 100,000 people, ranking it number 8 out of 15, just a hair below the 15-city average, and making it the list's median violent crime rate. Isn't it a funny coincidence how Atlanta ended up being both the median value in the percentage of Americans viewing it as unsafe and the median value in the violent crime rate? But wait, there's more. Atlanta's murder rate is relatively high for a city with otherwise average violent crime, standing at 26.04 per 100,000 people, ranking 4th highest on the list. Using violent crime rates, Atlanta's Perception Gap Index, PGI, is +0. 48, the 9th highest, suggesting Americans slightly underestimate its safety. However, using murder rates, its PGI plummets to -27.63, ranking 11th, indicating that folks might be underestimating their risk of getting murdered in the city. It's a tale of two stats, safe-ish or stab-ish, depending on which numbers you look at.
Now, let's shift gears to Detroit, the city that is to crime statistics what Florida is to bizarre news stories. Detroit was deemed unsafe by the highest percentage of respondents, 73% of Americans to be exact. Just 38% of Democrats and 15% of Republicans think Detroit is safe, the lowest among Democrats and the second lowest among Republicans. But hey, in this case, the public's got a point. Detroit tops our list with a staggering 2,056.67 violent crimes per 100,000 people. So how does Detroit fare in our Perception Gap Index? When we use violent crime rates, the public perception is pretty spot on, giving Detroit a PGI of exactly 0.00, ranking it 10th among the 15 cities. However, switch the metric to murder rates and things get a bit more nuanced. With 39.8 murders per 100,000 people, Detroit is ranked 3rd among the 15 cities on our list, giving it a PGI of +12.45, suggesting that the public moderately underestimates the safety of the city. But overall, Detroit is one of the few cities on the list where public perception generally lines up with reality, using both total violent crime rates and just murder rates. Next up, Boston. Only 25% of Americans believe that Beantown is unsafe, making it one of the most trusted cities on our list. Even more interesting, an outstanding 82% of Democrats and 61% of Republicans think Boston is safe. But reality has a slightly different tune. While Boston is indeed one of the safest cities on the list, it's not quite the utopia people imagine. With a violent crime rate of 669.20 per 100,000 people, Boston ranks as the 3rd lowest on the list. Its murder rate is 5.66 per 100,000 people, the 2nd lowest on the list, and almost as low as the national average. This brings Boston's Perception Gap Index, PGI, using violent crime rates to -16.16, ranking number 11, suggesting Boston is moderately less safe than folks think. Using murder rates, the PGI is -7.10, still indicating that Boston isn't as squeaky clean as imagined. Overall, while Boston is indeed one of the safest cities on the list, it's not quite the bulletproof paradise people seem to believe it is. Next, we waltz into New Orleans, where the jazz is hot, but the perception of danger is surprisingly cool. Only 42% of Americans think the Big Easy is unsafe, which lands it at the 7th lowest or 9th highest on our list. 72% of Democrats think it's safe, while 42% of Republicans feel the same. But let's hit the brakes and dive into reality. New Orleans is one of those rare cities that's far more dangerous than people imagine. The violent crime rate here is a whopping 1,121.41 per 100,000 people, making it the 2nd highest on our list. And if that's not spicy enough, the murder rate is an eye-popping 53.00 per 100,000, the highest by a mile. This shocking gap earns New Orleans a Perception Gap Index, PGI, of minus 19.28, using violent crime rates, putting it at the 12th highest spot, meaning people think it's safer than it is. When we switch to murder rates, the PGI nosedives to minus 64.58, the absolute bottom. In other words, folks massively underestimate their risk of getting murdered in this city. So, while the music might be sweet, the crime stats are downright sour.
Next, we mosey on over to Houston, where the perception of safety is as big as the Texas sky. Only 38% of Americans think Houston is unsafe, putting it 5th lowest on our list. Meanwhile, 66% of Democrats and 51% of Republicans believe it's safe. But hold your horses, because reality paints a different picture. Houston's violent crime rate is a hefty 1,095.3 per 100,000 people, making it the 5th highest on our list and moderately above the 15-city average. The murder rate is much better, but still isn't winning any safety awards either, standing at 14.61 per 100,000 people, the 10th highest. So despite what folks think, Houston isn't quite the safe haven they imagine. The city's Perception Gap Index, PGI, using violent crime rates is a grim minus 25.85, ranking it 13th and showing that Houston is not as safe as people believe. When we look at murder rates, the PGI is minus 17.82, putting Houston at 9th and confirming that, once again, it's not as safe as people think. Next up is Dallas. Only 25% of Americans think Dallas is unsafe, making it the 2nd lowest in perceived danger on our list. A whopping 74% believe it's safe, the highest confidence rating among all cities surveyed. That includes 74% of Democrats and an impressive 75% of Republicans. In fact, the percentage of Republicans who believe Dallas is safe is higher than for any other city on our list. But hold your cowboy hats, folks. Reality says otherwise. Dallas has a violent crime rate of 774.64 per 100,000 people, putting it at 9th highest, and a murder rate of 18.88 per 100,000 people, ranking 7th highest. So in both cases, Dallas is somewhere in the middle of the pack, given that Americans see Dallas as the epitome of safety, but it's actually just middling in terms of both violent crimes and murders. The Perception Gap Index, PGI, in both cases is very negative. The PGI using violent crimes is minus 27.08, the 2nd lowest, while the PGI using murders plunges to minus 55.65, also the 2nd lowest. With both Houston and Dallas near the bottom of our perception versus reality list, it seems that everything is bigger in Texas, including the gap between perception and reality. And finally, the grand finale. The city that's more dangerous than people think is Minneapolis. Surprise! Only 36% of Americans think Minneapolis is unsafe, making it the 4th lowest in perceived danger on our list. Breaking it down by political tribe, 76% of Democrats and 41% of Republicans believe it's safe. But hold on to your Prince records, because reality has a plot twist. Minneapolis has a violent crime rate of 1,101.27 per 100,000 people, the 3rd highest on our list. Shocking, right? Given this high violent crime rate, you'd expect a scary murder rate, but no. The murder rate is 16.94 per 100,000 people, placing it 9th highest, basically middle of the pack. This discrepancy earns Minneapolis a Perception Gap Index, PGI, of minus 30.43, using violent crimes the absolute lowest on the list, signaling that Minneapolis is far less safe than people think. When using murders, its PGI improves slightly to minus 28.16, ranking it 12th highest, yet still showing that people underestimate its danger. overall people perceive Minneapolis to be a very safe city. But in reality, it is actually quite unsafe relative to the other cities on the list, giving it the lowest PGI.
To wrap up this roller coaster of a video, here's the lowdown on our 15 cities. Using total violent crime rates to measure actual safety, New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Francisco are way safer than people give them credit for. Philadelphia, Miami, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta are moderately safer than their reputations suggest. Detroit's safety perception is right on the money. Boston is very safe, but just not as safe as everyone thinks. While New Orleans, Houston, Dallas, and Minneapolis are far more dangerous than people believe. Now, if we use just murder rates to gauge safety, New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago once again top the list of cities that are way safer than they're perceived. Detroit is moderately safer than it looks, while Seattle and Boston are still safe, but not quite as safe as people think. Philadelphia, Houston, Miami, Atlanta, Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., Dallas, and especially New Orleans, less safe than their reputations might lead you to believe. In absolute terms, based on violent crime rates, New York City, Seattle, Boston, San Francisco, Miami, Los Angeles, and Dallas are the lowest and well below the 15-city average. Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. hover near the average. Houston, Chicago, Minneapolis, and New Orleans are quite a bit above the average, with Detroit taking the dubious honor of having by far the highest rates. Looking at murder rates, New York City, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, Houston, Minneapolis, Miami, and Dallas are the safest and well below the 15-city average. Chicago, Philadelphia, and Atlanta are a bit above the average. Detroit, Washington, D.C., and New Orleans, they're the highest and well above the 15-city average. But here's the real kicker. In all these cities, violent crimes affect a tiny fraction of the population. Your chances of being a victim are extremely, extremely low. So be cautious, but don't let fear dictate your life. Statistically, you're almost certainly not going to be a victim of violent crime in any of these cities.
And there you have it. Public perception can be hilariously off, sometimes being the exact opposite of the truth. Whether your city is deemed a danger zone or a peaceful paradise, the numbers reveal the real story. Stay informed and always check the stats. You might be surprised at what you find. Speaking of surprising realities, our perceptions of historical figures can also be quite misleading. For instance, take a look at my video, How Hitler Would Sound Speaking English. Just like people's skewed views on city safety, this video demonstrates how the voice of history's most evil figure did not sound like you thought it did. Click the link and dive into another eye-opening exploration of fact versus perception.